Okay, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for the lecture tonight. If you have a cell phone on you, please take it out and silence it at this time. If you need further assistance with that, just raise your hand and I'll come around and help you. Without further ado, let's give a warm welcome to Dora, Ted, and Beverly. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Ted Oshman. I don't think too many of you know me. Obviously, you all know Dora. So we're here tonight to tell stories related to our individual families. You can't hear me? Okay, so, can you hear? Yeah, okay. So the topic or the name of the presentation that Dora and I decided to give were the choices people made to survive. So Dora is a Holocaust survivor. Quite obviously, I am not, but I am the son of Holocaust survivors. And the stories we are going to tell are stories of our individual families. Dora, because of her personal experience, is going to tell the story of her experience. For me, all of my family, my great-great-grandparents on my maternal side, my fraternal side, were all affected by the Holocaust. So when I was picking the story that I was going to tell, I had so many people to pick from, I just decided to focus in on the family of my mother. So I'll be telling you the story of my mother's immediate family, and obviously my father as well, because they met during the Holocaust. But we're going to begin first with Dora. Any questions, feel free to ask them after each of our individual presentations, and I'm now going to hand the mic and this necklace over to Dora. This is from Tiffany's, right?
Give me that one.
Here you go.
Tiffany's. Okay, got Tiffany's. Okay. Can you hear me? Yeah. No?
Yes.
Yes? Okay. Okay, I was born in 1937 to Max and Sarah Hector in a shtetl right out in eastern Poland. I was the youngest of 4 children. There was a town square with cobblestone main roads, no sidewalks, and streets were mostly of dirt. There was a shul where all the children went to Cheder, Hebrew school. With all anti-Semitism that existed, it's important to mention that there was a wealthy Polish Christian man, Mr. Budner, who was very good to the Jews. He helped with the repairs of the synagogue and such. Life was extremely hard. In order to support his family, my father would leave Sunday morning with his horse and wagon and come back on Friday just in time for Shabbos. He would buy and sell whatever he could. Mostly, he would go to a glass factory and collect broken glass and junk and sell for recycling. It was up to my mother to take care of all the needs of her family. Mostly everyone in town was quite poor. Although my mother had to take care of her family without my father during the week, she also would see to it that those families who did not have enough food were taken care of, particularly for Shabbos. Every Friday, my mother would collect challah and other food from neighbors in her apron for those less fortunate. I was 2 years old when Hitler invaded Poland. Needless to say, I have virtually no recollection of those days, although I do remember the bombs, running and hiding under trees. My father often spoke of our experiences. He was only 32, but very wise, and it was due to his tenacity and perseverance that our family survived. September 1st, 1939, when the Germans came, we were in Ishbitze, a town near where we lived. We were there because my father picked apples for a farmer and was there for several months during the harvest season. My father would always say, the Germans are like mad dogs. Remember what they did to the Jews during World War I, and he wasn't waiting around this time. In September 1939, he took his family, loaded up his horse-drawn wagon with all belongings, and headed away from the coming Germans. Among the few things that we did have were feather beds, which later saved our lives on several occasions. He chose to go to the part of Poland that was occupied by the Russians. There was a stream of people and horses and carts going both directions. On the way, we met up with people we knew, and they told us not to continue, that there was no food and the conditions were deplorable. They were returning home. They told my father that he was crazy, that the war would surely blow over in no time. There was no chance of persuading him to change his mind. It was pretty amazing that he had such foresight. I guess my father was a survivor. Throughout our adversities, and there were many, he managed to keep us alive. We were rounded up and sent in freight trains. It was so crowded that there was hardly any room to sit, and people had to take turns sitting. We traveled packed closely together for weeks on the Trans-Siberian Railroad and then on sleds to the Tigers deep into Siberia. There we were put into barracks and given a small corner for the entire family. We hung up a blanket to give us some privacy. There were no facilities, no running water, cooking facilities, or toilets. The winters were very harsh. The ground was never without snow. My feet were frostbitten, and because of it, I still have a scar on one of my feet. We would wear rags for shoes. My father was given a job delivering supplies, and my mother worked in the fields during the summer. My sister Jean, at the age of 11, took care of us. While my father was working, there and delivering supplies, his horse died. And of course, my father was to be punished. He was sent into the deep forest. My mother sent Jean along to help to take care of him because she was afraid he might not survive. He had to chop down trees, and Jean would look for food. After his 2-week punishment period, they returned, and we stayed in Siberia for 2 years. In 1942, when the Second Front started, we were freed. We had no idea what was going on. The papers told us only of the Russian victories. We had received a letter that my maternal grandmother died. We then went to Middle Asia, Uzbekistan. The 4 of us had malaria and typhoid. The hygiene conditions were deplorable. It never snows there, but when we were there, it snowed and we were out in the street. And the only protection we had from the elements were the feather beds and a canopy my father erected for us. There were refugees all over the place without any shelter. We then went to Kazakhstan, where we stayed for 3 years. We lived in a tiny little house with dirt floors that had an entrance with a stove and another room where we slept and ate. In order to keep the dust from coming up through these floors, we had to collect cow dung and spread it out on the floor. And of course, we would have to wait for it to dry before we could go inside. There was no indoor plumbing. There was an outhouse and a water pump outside. We were given ration stamps for very limited food. I must say that the Russians were good to us at that time. We were given the same amount of food as their own people. My family was better off than most Jews. Through various bribes to the authorities, my parents managed to keep my father out of the Russian army. There was a pit in the middle of the town where they would throw the bodies. A man stole a cabbage They chopped off his hand. People would come to us for skins of the potatoes. Most of the time we were hungry. I remember there was a piece of bread that had mildewed, and I was so hungry. My mother had to tell me that we had to save it. I also remember being sick and my mother carrying me around and wouldn't let me fall asleep. She was afraid I wouldn't wake up. We all went to school, which was 3 miles away, and had to cross a desert. We all walked to the school together, and my sisters and brother were given strict instructions to always wait for me, as I was only 6 years old. One day they forgot me in school, and so I had to walk home myself. There was a blinding windstorm, and you couldn't see anything through the blowing sand. I was also aware of quicksand around, and had I stepped into it, I would have been swallowed up. Being all alone in the blinding storm and afraid to take a step, I started to cry hysterically. Fortunately, a man came along on a camel and showed me how to get to Choose safely. On my mother's side, there were 7 children and their families. One cousin survived, as she had gone to Israel before the war. On my father's side, there were 7 children and their families. 2 cousins, who were brothers, survived. When one of these brothers and his wife and 4 of their children were trying to escape, they could only carry 2. And so 2 of their children were left behind. Imagine having to make that choice. Between 200 and 300 people in our family perished. Some were shot. Others were sent to concentration camps. When the war ended, we got to Linz, Austria, where we lived in a displaced persons camp, Bindermill. There we were protected by the U.S. military. My father started a little grocery store in the apartment. It was the UNRWA, United Nations Relief Association, that took care of our needs. Also, ORT, the first Jewish organization to help with the retraining and resettlement of war-displaced Jews, was there. Surrounding this camp was a great deal of anti-Semitism, and several people were killed by the Austrians. A school was set up in Bindermill, and the teachers were drawn from our community, as well as teachers from Israel who taught us in Hebrew. I was very Zionistic and joined a Zionist youth organization. We wore uniforms, white shirts, navy skirts, and navy hats. We learned about Israel, sang Israeli songs, went camping, and enjoyed a wonderful pro-Israel experience which made me want to become a pioneer in Israel. We were to go to Israel, but my oldest sister, Jean, married a man who had family in the United States. So they came in 1947. Once they got here, they were able to get visas for us, and we went to Baltimore in 1949. Something else I would like to share with you. At one point, while we were on a train, and there was so much disease, people who were sick were being taken off the train, separating families, never to be heard of again. The 4 of us were also sick, and my mother had covered us up with a feather beds so we wouldn't be seen. There was a woman sitting across from us whose daughter had just been taken off the train and said to my mother that she was going to report her, that we were sick. And just as soon as the next policeman came along, my mother very wisely said to her that if that will bring your child back, then you go ahead and report not. Another miracle. At another point, my mother was online for food, and the lines miles long. There was a woman who was in a daze holding a child. My mother noticed the baby was motionless. She went up to her and said, "Do you realize that your baby's dead?" She said that she knew, but didn't want to lose her place in line. After all, she had other children at home that she had to take care of. It's impossible to imagine how people went on. To save one's family, one must gather such strength. There is no choice. Thank you for listening to me. Thank you.
I think if anyone has questions of Dora, we should feel free to ask them now while her presentation is fresh in your mind. Any questions? No? Okay.
Could you wear the mic?
Sure. Yeah, I need the necklace. Thank you.
Thank you.
So out of habit, I'm gonna stand and I'm actually gonna use the podium over here. So part of my presentation, I'm just going to be speaking to you, but for another part, I'm going to be reading to you, and most of what I'm going to read to you was written by my mother and father. So I'm going to say most, but not all. I'm also going to be mentioning a lot of names of people, and the names of these people are my family members, most of whom perished. However, if any of the last names ring a bell, please come talk with me afterwards, because over the years, I've met dozens and dozens of relatives, which will be part of the presentation. So, as you know, the choices people made to survive is what this presentation is about. And we heard the choice that Dora's family made, which was a really wise choice. Dora's father and mother did not wait for the war to reach them. The minute her mother and father heard of the outbreak of the war, they immediately fled to the west. To the east. And interestingly, they fled to the Soviet Union, or Russia. And Russia was a place where Jews survived during the war. It was a place of safety and refuge. There were hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of Jews that survived the Holocaust because, while the Russians were not warm, friendly people, they were also not preoccupied at that time with anti-Semitism. They were more preoccupied with the fact that 20 million Russians had been killed by the Germans. So, with that said, I'm going to begin my presentation. So, these two people here are my great-great-grandfather and my great-great-grandmother on my mother's side. The man is Zvi Hirsch Nechemowski, born in 1835. The woman is Bela Niankowski, born in 1838. Now, my great-great-grandparents decided to have 8 children. And 2 of the daughters moved between 1895 and 1905 to the United States. That would be Yenta Selvin and Nechema Nechemowski Heimowitz. 3 of the other children during the same time period decided to move to France, and that would be Leon Leib Nechemowski, Judith Nechemowski Blanchier, and Sarah Nechemowski Kunarski. Now, I'm really, really fortunate because in 1935, for the 100th birthday of my great-great-grandfather, his 2 daughters who were living in New York decided to pay their father a visit. And they traveled from New York to their brothers and sisters in Paris, and then from Paris to the brothers, sister, and their grandfather, who was still alive. He was 100 years old, and the grandmother was 97. And guess what they brought with them? They brought a camera. This picture was taken by my great-great-aunts, in 1935 in the city of Novogrudek, which was the place where my family, my mother, all my uncles and cousins came from. Now, upper right picture, the two women, where it says top left, is my great-great-aunt, Nechama Haimowitz. She's on the left, wing hairdo, and the woman next to her is Yenta Sullivan. And those are the two people who made the trip from New York to Paris to Novogrudek, Belarus, with their camera. The next picture is the family in Paris. These are my three great-great-aunts and uncles, Lev Nachamovsky, who actually became a very, very well-known furniture designer in Paris in the 1820s and 1830s. Also in that picture is Sarah Nachamovsky-Kronowski and Judith Nachamovsky-Blanchier. This is my Paris family. And here's more of the family and their children. And I will tell you, while obviously the two sisters who traveled from New York and their families survived the Holocaust, the families, the three families that went from Novogrudek to Paris, half of them survived and half of them did not. But they were smart enough in 1895 and 1900 to recognize that there was no future for Jews in Belarus. They left because of anti-Semitism, they left because of pogroms, and they did not want to live that life anymore. But unfortunately, part of my family decided to stay. And these are pictures of my great-great-aunts and uncles in Novogrudek in 1935. You see in front my great-great-grandparents, and surrounding them are their daughters and sons, and including my great-grandfather, Mordechai Nachamovsky, as well as another great-great-aunt of mine, Peshka Nachamovsky Boldo, and unfortunately Shlomo Nachamovsky. His children are in this picture, but Shlomo died before 1935. Now, Peshka Nachamovsky Boldo had a daughter, and that daughter is in this picture right here. She's kneeling on her knee, and her daughter was Sonia Boldo Belsky. Does that name mean anything to anyone? Belsky? Okay. Belsky partisans, correct? So the Belsky partisans are part of this story. Sonia Boldo Belsky was my mother's first cousin. Now, that picture was taken in 1935. My great-great-grandfather died in 1936. My great-great-grandmother died in 1937. Unfortunately, this now brings us to 1941, and from this point, for a little while, I'm going to read from some of the historical writings of my parents. Okay. Sonia Nachamovsky Dorotinsky Oshman was born in Novogrudek on December the 17th, 1922. Her father was Abraham Dorotinsky, her mother was Tamara Nachamovsky Dorotinsky. Abraham was a businessman, Tamara was the mother of five. My mother was one of five children. In addition to my mother, there was another daughter, Fania, and three sons. One of the sons' name was Shaul, who my mother was extremely close to, who, as you'll hear shortly, she survived the war with. They had a very warm, friendly, open family. While her family was clearly very religious, her mother and father tended to be a bit more secular. But they did live together in the same household as my mother's grandparents, which was somewhat traditional at the time. They had a very Zionistic home, which, again, was not always popular amongst all Jews in Eastern Europe, but it was in her home. The Nazi invasion of Novogrudek began in June of 1941. It shattered the tranquility of my mother's family and their existence. In an oral testimony given by my mother to the Shoah Foundation, she described the horrifying deaths of her grandparents with whom she lived. Separated from the rest of the family during the first Novogrudek massacre, there were multiple organized massacres in Novogrudek and in all other ghettos. The first one was on December 8, 1941, where her grandparents and my mother's other aunts from that grandparent were thrown into trucks and hauled away together with screaming babies and children, separated from their mothers. Everyone was told by the Germans that the older people were being taken to work. So my mother spoke of her desperate wait and futile hope for her beloved parents to finish their work and return home. Obviously, it did not happen. Detailing the dreadful conditions of the Pereshka, or ghetto, as it was known in Novogrudek. My mother noted that her family were among over 50 families crowded into a house from December 1941 until August 1942. So there were over 225 people living in one house. During this time, she worked as a nurse in the ghetto without any training and devoid of any medicine. One of her brothers worked as a mechanic, another as a carpenter, while her parents cleaned for the Germans. For all their toil, they were each paid a salary of dirty water and a slice of bread made from unclean wheat. For the entire 9 months, they wore the same clothes that they had been wearing on the day they were forced into the ghetto. Of their entire family, only my mother and her brother Shaul survived the war. Their 14-year-old brother Chanya was forced to dig his own grave before being murdered in the second Novogrudek massacre in August 1942. Her brother Shlomo, who was 20 years old, starved to death in January of 1943. By now, Shaul and Sonia, their parents, and little sister Fanya were interned in a forced labor camp in Novogrudek. Here, my mother worked as a seamstress, cleaner, and Shaul as a mechanic, working alongside his father Abraham. On May 7, 1943, Shaul, Sonia, Abraham, and their fellow inmates were witness to Novogrudek's fourth and last massacre. Helplessly, directly inside their window, they watched the murder of Tamara, mother, Fanya's sister, and scores of others. At their deaths, Tamara was 43 years old, Fanya just 11. 1 week later, Abraham was transferred to the Kolcheko concentration camp, where he was murdered. For those of you not familiar with the Kolcheko concentration camp, it was in the Ukraine, and just, Ukraine's in the news these days, but I will add this fact. In one day, the Ukrainians killed more Jews than the Germans killed in any given day in all the concentration camps combined, and that was Baba Yar. There was never a larger slaughter of Jews in a 24-hour period than that committed by the Ukrainians. And it was not done by Germans, it was done by Ukrainians. My grandfather was killed on that day. Now, my father was born in Leipzig, Germany on May 15, 1910, to Dora Oshman and Tamar Gorovich. They were very well-to-do, and they made the mistaken decision of returning from Leipzig, Germany to Ivanitz, which was sitting next to Novogrudek, so that they could be with their father's parents. So, Ivanitz was probably a couple kilometers away from Novogrudek. One day, his home was overrun by Germans. It was unexpected. They were not prepared for it. And my father was not at home at the time. He was out with his brother. But when he returned to Ivanitz with his brother Yankel from a nearby town, he arrived to the site of the massacre of his parents, his older brother Reuven, and hundreds of other Jews. Obviously broken, my father and his brother Yankel were forced to go to Nova Grude, where the ghetto and slave labor camp was located, and he was interned by the Germans in the Nova Grude camp where my mother was. There, he met my mother, as he described. And my mother was 18 years old at the time, so just imagine what's going on in the life of an 18-year-old. He met what he describes as a beautiful young girl, his future wife, my mother Sonia, who found him crying over the deaths of his parents. Now, I've already told you about 4 massacres that had occurred in the Nova labor camp. There were 6,000 Jews in Nova Grude when the war began there in June of 1941. We're now into July of 1943. Of the 6,000 Jews, there are 257 left. So, what choice did they have? Well, they decided there was no purpose in just waiting, so they decided to dig a tunnel. I mean, it's a crazy idea. Dig a tunnel out under the ghetto, through the concentration camp wall, and into a nearby forest. This picture, if you see there are bricks laying, creating a line, and there's a wall. That wall represents the wall of the ghetto. In the barracks where they lived for a period of 3.5 months, they dug a tunnel. This is the actual barracks where they were being held. It exists today in Belarus. It was restored by an Englishman named Jack Hagan, and you can go there and actually see this. The tunnel exists today. Underneath one of the barracks beds is a tunnel. They dug for 3.5 months by their hands, carrying dirt out in their socks, their pants, for 3.5 months. The tunnel extended a few hundred meters under all the barracks, under the ghetto wall, and out into a forest. So this is the backside of the ghetto where they lived, and here is the trail of the tunnel. Obviously, my parents were part of the group that dug the tunnel to get out. One night, they all went out through the tunnel. Of the 257 people, some turned to the right, some turned to the left. Those who turned to the left lived. Those who turned to the right were gunned down by Germans. About 127 of the 253 people made it out through the tunnel and lived. But where were they going to go? What were they going to do? So they got out of the camp. Well, the camp was in an area called Nalibaki, and the Nalibaki region had a forest. All the Jews knew that there were partisan groups that fought in the Nalibaki forest. So my parents hoped to be able to reach one of those partisan groups. When they escaped through the tunnel, they were in a line. Everyone had a number. So my mother's number was 77. My uncle's number, Shaw, was 78. My father was 79. His brother was 80. My mother's cousin, Ray Kushner, was 81. My mother's cousin, Lisa Kushner, was 82. And their father, Noam, was 83. And they followed my mother out the tunnel. She was the first one in the line. They were all holding hands, and they ran and escaped. They were trudging in darkness for weeks. Hunger. They were being hunted by the Germans. They would hide under leaves and in ditches. And one night, after being on the run for 3 weeks, giving up hope of ever finding the partisan groups, they saw a farmhouse that was owned by a non-Jew. My mother went to the door. She was the youngest girl, so they picked her to do it. She begged and she pleaded, and the farmer gave them a potato dish. Now, none of us here are farmers, but the way farmers store potatoes in the wintertime is they dig a ditch in the ground. It can be 8 to 10 feet below the ground, and through geothermal heat, it's 65 degrees and it doesn't freeze. They let my parents, my uncle, my cousins Lisa Ray and Malcolm Kushner, my uncle Shoal and my uncle Yankel stay in the potato dish for 5 weeks. One morning, the farmer comes to my parents, the Germans are coming, you gotta leave. He directed them in the direction where he believed the partisans were fighting, and sure enough, in 3 days they were spotted by a spotter, and they were brought into the Nalabucky Forest where the Belsky partisans were. And I don't know if any of you have seen the movie Defiance, but that's the story of the Belsky partisans. And here is a picture taken with someone else who had a camera of the Belsky partisans in the Nalabucky Forest in 1943. I know most of these people. I've lived my life with most of these people. We'll get to that in a moment. Obviously, they all have guns. Look at the age of these people. The fighters were mostly 18, 19, 20-year-olds. Most of the people who survived were young. Very few 45, 50-year-olds survived the Holocaust or survived in the partisans. Most of these kids, like my mother, 17, 18, 19 years old. Here, now, I could spend a lot of time, but I'm looking at what time it is, and unfortunately, I was going to talk a bit more about the Belsky partisans, but there's not enough time, and I want to leave some moments for questioning. After the war, just like Sarah's family, my parents they went back to their city of Novgorod, just like Sarah told you, there was rampant anti-Semitism. Dora, I'm thinking of my aunt, right, just like Dora. Right. It's just like Dora's family, after the war, every place my parents went in Europe, the anti-Semitism continued. It wasn't just from Germans. They were in Austria too. They were in the Graz DP camp, not the same as your parents. Then they went to multiple DP camps in Hungary. Ultimately, they made it to Italy. And in Italy, they made it to Italy in 1945, and there was a child boom. This is Italy, 1945, all the young Jewish women with their babies. They all decided when they got to Italy, if they're able to have children, to replace their families. So this is a group of Holocaust survivors in a refugee camp in Ladispoli, which is near Rome. My parents remained in Italy for 5 years. They ultimately, my father was able to find a job in Florence. And that's my father on the left, my mother on the right. My father worked at the Jewish synagogue in Florence. And this little kid here, the chubby kid, that's him right there. That's him, stand on that. That's my brother Matt, who was born, he hasn't changed. That's my brother Matt, who was born in the DP camp in Florence in 1945. My parents remained in Florence in 1945 for 5 years. But my uncle Shel and Yankel, who my parents survived the war with, went to Israel on the Har Dove ship, which is the movie Exodus. That was their boat. And my uncle Shel became a major general in the Israeli army. My uncle Yankel became a contractor. And I'm just going to tell you that we are all super close. We're in weekly touch with one another. We see each other multiple times a year. And I'm just going to conclude the picture with the presentation with this picture. So, I grew up in an environment of survivors. I could not get away from them. Where I went to school, children of survivors. Where we lived, children of survivors. My father's business partners, survivors. Who we vacationed with, survivors. This is a typical picture of my parents socializing with their friends on New Year's Day, I believe it was 1985. In the picture, Aaron Oshman, Sonia Oshman, Tevye Belsky, Lily Belsky, Zusbelski, Sonia Boldobelski, Berger, Friedman, and I think that's Jake Belsky over here, right, Matt, with the glasses? Yeah. And over here on the right, Chaim Leibovich, Joe Kushner, and my cousins Ray Kushner and Lisa Kushner. So, I say their names because that's how I remember them, and it's showing them respect. When were you born? I was born in 1956 in a grocery store in East New York on New Lots Avenue. You know New Lots Avenue? Yeah, it's a fun place to live, right? I'm not there anymore. So, by the way, just one question, and by the way, my family today, for those who survived, Matt and I have family in France, all over, London. We even have a cousin still in Moscow. We have a huge family in Israel. We have family in Canada, Chile, Brazil, Australia. And you know what everybody talks about today? Where are we going to have to go next? That's what they talk about today. So that concludes my presentation. I'm sorry? Question? Yeah, I don't know if you're asking a question. By the way, just as an aside, does anyone know who the son of Ray Kushner and Joe Kushner is? That's the grandson. The ambassador to France, Charles Kushner, Matt's cousin and my cousin, is their son, and Jared is their grandson. Also from the Nachamovsky families are members of the House of Lords in England, a delegate to Parliament in Australia, Chabad rabbi in Santiago, Chile, and numerous members of the Israel Defense Forces. So, some people made choices and survived, and that's where we are today. Questions? Right. Hopefully, don't forget.
I was in Brooklyn.
Oh, you survived Brooklyn. Oh. Lucky. Any questions from anyone? No questions. Okay. Easy group.
I just want to make a comment. You're very fortunate that you have so many people in your family that did survive. And I can count on one hand.
Yeah. So
you're very, very fortunate.
yeah. So you're fortunate. Your dad decided to move fast. He didn't ask questions. My family, those who left Belarus, survived. Half of them survived. And those who were willing to escape through a tunnel survived. But those who just waited, they did not survive. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Oh, question.
Anyone in your family traveled back to Germany or wherever they were from?
So, the question was, is anyone from my family traveled back to where we were from? So it's an interesting question. I decided not to because my mother influenced me not to, but it was a mistake. So my mother refused to go back. My father refused. Well, basically, my father would do what my mother decided. So my mother refused to go back. She did not want to step foot in Belarus again. She had no desire to see the people. She had no desire to live in the ghetto. And because of that, I didn't go back. But hopefully one day I will.
I just want to mention I happened to go back to Poland, to the shtetl. I went with my oldest sister, her two daughters, and we found that they had plowed over the cemetery, and so the stones were being kept by a man who said he could use the stones for some construction in his home. But he saved them for us. He covered it with a tarp and branches and whatnot. And when we got there, we made sure that we put a fence around the cemetery. It was all flattened. There were no. But what we did with the stones, and I have some pictures here, is we put up some statues, and we honored my parents here. And so this family was most grateful. We wanted to give them some money, they wouldn't take it. And he did ask if we could bring one of their sons to the States, which we did. And so I have some pictures and stuff, and still a lot of anti-Semitism. I don't know how they knew that we were coming, but we come into this little shell, and there's graffiti on the wall of the school. Juden Rouse, Hangman's Noose, a little building in flames. They're happy the synagogue is burning. There isn't a Jew there, but they must have heard we were coming. And that's so you have it there. We met up with a rabbi in Warsaw, and the man that traveled with us had a yarmulke on, and we were leaving, and the man said, the rabbi says, take off your yarmulke, it's not safe to walk with a yarmulke on. So here we are, still in present day. Okay. Thank you for listening. Yes? How old am I?
Never ask a woman.
That's okay. I'm 88. I'm 88 years old.
88. Should all live tonight.
Did I say the right number?
Dora.
She was fighting.
Dora.
Oh.
What has it been like for the two of you to go back and recollect and reminisce and put this together? How have you felt doing it?
A day doesn't go by that something doesn't get into my head about my past. It's just, we were very, very fortunate that we were able to come to the States, and my family has done very nicely here, and it's a wonderful country that we live in, so much to be grateful for to be here. But it was not an easy time, to say the least.
So I do it every day. To answer your question, what's it like to reminisce? It's a daily thing.
Could you use the mic, please?
Yeah, sure, I'm sorry. So the question was, what was it like to do this and reminisce? And so I do it every day. I mean, it's part of my life. It's unfortunate that I was only given 20 minutes. I had to cut a lot out. So I enjoy talking about it. I enjoy talking about my family. I don't enjoy, obviously, parts of the story, but I like telling the names of the people who didn't survive. I like telling people the stories of my family, so it's a positive thing. There's nothing negative. And in fact, I happen to be friends with Dora's daughter and son-in-law. And whenever we go out, I force them to listen to my stories. So,
I want to thank you both so much for pulling together this presentation that's been very informative and extremely well done.
Any other questions? No? One more.
You mentioned the name Belsky.
Yes.
What was the relationship?
So,
I knew two young men of it when I was a young lad. I knew the Belsky, they were medical students in my class.
So Belsky was, I mean, it's a whole other presentation for another night that I'll be very, very happy to do for you. But the Belsky family started and founded the partisan group commonly known as the Belsky Brigade. And it was four brothers in Europe. There was also two brothers who left Europe for the United States before the war even started. So 4 brothers started the partisan group after their mother and father were murdered by Belarusian police officers who were cooperating with the Germans. They weren't even killed by the Germans, they were killed by Belarusians. Much like all the Jews at Baba Yar were killed by Ukrainians, not by Germans. So the Belskis were the family of Defiance fame. The Belskis you went to school with, I'm happy to talk to you, maybe they're related.
Very good, thank you.
Okay. It's 2 hours.